I'd like to give our guest, Joe Brewer, a big Pickering College welcome. Joe is a transdisciplinary scholar and environmentalist. He knew that to try help the world, he needed to understand two things: the planet, so he studied Earth system science, and people, so he studied cognitive science. He lives in Barichara, Colombia, where he is working to regenerate over 1 million acres of land. He is the founder of the Design Institute for Regenerating Earth and author of the Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. Joe, I would love for us to engage in a 3-hour-long discussion. However, we have very limited time, so this will be a speed round. My first question to you is, if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
The advice I would give is that the difficulties and hardships I experienced as a teenager, which made my life basically suck when I was in high school, are exactly what prepared me to thrive and to create a beautiful and full life later on. And so I would just say, trust the process and it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. And what started your passion for regeneration, and when did you start thinking about the climate and the environment?
I have a very clear memory when I was in 4th grade. We had these little newspapers called Weekly Readers, and we were learning about how the rivers were becoming so polluted that people would need to drink from bottled water, water in plastic bottles. And as a 4th grader in the middle of the 1980s, this seemed insane to me. Mm-hmm. And then by the time high school came around, everyone was drinking water from plastic bottles. And I was very aware even then that we were doing something very imbalanced and dangerous to the rest of the planet.
Mm-hmm. How did it make you feel when others didn't care as much, or when you see the adults taking not enough action?
There were a few years, maybe even up to 2 decades, where I felt really angry, judgmental, and frustrated. Mm-hmm. And I would go in and out of periods of depression and find nights of darkness. Mm-hmm. And what I gradually came to realize was that it didn't really matter so much if everyone was doing the right thing, as long as I could find a way to do something for myself to help me feel better about my relationship to what was going on. And gradually, all of those feelings calmed down.
Mm-hmm. People in the Western world live comfortable lives and often don't want to go outside their comfort zone. It often takes a lot of extreme disasters or crises to put people for change. With how adaptable people are, how do you think we can drive engagement when people feel they have no impact?
I think one of the most important things is to connect people back to themselves. Because one of the things that the modern world does is it causes us to confuse our needs and our wants and to feel insecure, so that we need to go and buy things and fill this hole that's in our hearts. And so what I found is that if we can find a way to connect with something deeply meaningful within our own hearts, that we begin to find a pathway into our own empowerment. And this actually breaks down the delusion that we're separate, this illusion that we're not part of something bigger. And it's from that place that our small actions can actually scale upward.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say to someone who says their actions don't have an impact because they're one tiny person and they feel hopeless?
I would say that feeling hopeless means you're paying attention, and that should actually give you comfort. And in a strange way, that begins to open up a space for healing, because the acknowledgement of the feeling of hopelessness is a recognition that there really are serious problems and they're not being casually dismissed. And from that place, there's the ability to create an authentic connection where friendship can be born. And then the person's feeling hopeless will no longer feel so alone. And from that place of togetherness, they can begin to find a path of empowerment.
Mm-hmm. The ESG frameworks of sustainability are currently within the existing economic growth models. How do you feel they're inadequate for the task at hand, and how could we frame regeneration as an alternative?
I have friends who have worked to build the entire ecosystem of ESG measures, and mostly they agree that they don't work and they're mostly false. Mm-hmm. Not because of their intentions, but because of the larger system that they're connected to. So what I found is that by going directly to nature, to going and working with land, to planting trees, to restoring waterways, that I see how these living systems actually work. And from there, we can go back to the relationships between humans and start to build harmony between what happens in the natural world and what humans can do. And this is very different from going into the business world, which is mostly captured by dangerous ideas of what I would say are false separation. Mm-hmm. For example, that humans are not part of nature. That's a false separation. Mm-hmm. And that we're not going to find the solutions within those mind spaces. We're going to find them in the real world.
Mm-hmm. there's kind of a conflict between two perspectives on how we can improve the world and the environment. There's one that technology will save the world, and there's another where an idea where society needs to shift. How can we balance these ideas and bring people together rather than divide them?
One of the most important things to know is that all that technology is the application of knowledge or some tool to solve a problem, which means technology in itself may be good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate, and the real question is the quality of our thinking. So what I would say is that if we get better at discerning what is happening in the world around us and become better thinkers and more skilled at seeing what actually works, then we know which tool to use.
I keep hearing of the concept of pro-social, and I understand that is the behavior of being systemically beneficial to all of society, but can you help us understand this term and how it fits into bioregional regeneration?
So one of the big things that you'll see if you go out into the world and try and create change is that a lot of people carry pain and trauma inside of themselves, and they don't actually believe that they can collaborate with others. They think someone's going to let them down or isn't trustworthy, or maybe they don't feel trustworthy in themselves. One of the key things that pro-social is about is learning to find how we judge ourselves and how we judge others from within ourselves. And then from that place of noticing, we develop a mindfulness practice. And with that mindfulness practice, we can ask ourselves, who is the better person that I want to be, and how am I doing honestly, without judgment, right now? And this creates a place for us to connect with ourselves and our own behavioral change. And as we change our own behavior from a place of self-knowledge and self-awareness, then we can have more compassion for ourselves and for others, and that opens up a space where we can collaborate. This relates to the bioregional scale or the larger scale in that the challenges we face are incredibly complex and can't be addressed by one person alone. So we need to find ways into deep collaborative relationships built on honesty, authenticity, trust, and shared purpose. And all of those are about being pro-social.
And for the average student who's still learning about themselves and the world, what would you say the number one thing they can do, or what should they be doing to have these kinds of growth and improvements?
I would say to find a quiet place, to listen to your heart, and to ask what is most important to you. And one way to find an answer to that question is to imagine that you're on your deathbed at the end of your life, and you ask yourself, what would I regret that I hadn't done? Is there something that needed protecting, that if I didn't protect it, I would regret it? If there was something that was in need of nourishing, that would bring me joy and exhilaration in my life, did I give love to the beauty of that process? And if I didn't, will I regret it? And from this place, we can find our own heart's purpose. But we need enough quiet space and introspection to find it. And I start this way because what the world needs is hearts that are activated by a deep sense of authentic purpose.
Mm-hmm. Globally, we consume over 100 million barrels of oil and oil substitutes a day. How can we create business models within the current economic incentive structure that will allow for a transition to local bioregional economic viability?
Well, mostly it's the incentive structures of the current economic system that are the problem. So what we need to do is stop treating those as real and instead recognize that they're socially constructed, which means we could construct different ones. What I found in the practice of creating regenerative businesses is that they're always based in real relationships in a local place around the material flows of that place. So for example, if there's an agroforestry project where people are growing a forest, the forest can produce food, it can produce textiles, it can produce construction materials. So the question becomes, what are the relationships between all of those materials that are being created and how they're used in that place? And from there, we can create incentive structures that support collaboration, that support shared purposes, like restoring a watershed or something that's larger scale than the project itself. And then from there, design or create or prototype and test the incentive structures that are needed.
Mm-hmm. What is one thing that you've learned that has inspired you, or do you think that would be helpful for the average person from your time in Barichara?
One thing I learned about my time in Barichara is that growing up in the United States, I never had any idea what community really was. I grew up in so many different contexts or lived in different places as an adult where people did not know how to be in community. And when I went to Barichara, Colombia, I discovered that there were people that live in a real community This wasn't like an intentional community or an eco-village that someone tried to design where everyone who came there had no experience in community. These were multiple generations of people from the same place who all knew each other and had relationships. And so one of the things that I learned is that it feels very different, and I've got to say, much better to be in real community.
And what kinds of things do you think schools can do to help regenerate nature and prevent climate change? What should they be doing?
I think one of the most important things schools can do is to cultivate the awareness that students have in themselves for where their source of sovereignty and power comes from, which is to ignite their passion for learning, to open their hearts for caring, and cultivating the sense of responsibility to themselves and others. And one of the best ways to do this is by engaging in community service, which includes the more than human world. So how are we in service to the community of birds, the community of frogs, the community of butterflies? And as we find that we can connect compassionately to these different parts of the larger community that we live in, we can cultivate the kind of moral character and the kind of civic action or responsible social behavior that makes those schools thrive later, and that also help those students to go throughout their lives as lifetime learners.
Elinor Ostrom won the 2009 Nobel Prize in Economics. She listed 8 principles for managing the commons. Can you help us understand how these principles can be foundational in bioregional regeneration?
One of the key insights that Elinor Ostrom had was that people cooperate to manage something that they share in common, such as a piece of land for grazing or water for fish stock, the fish that live in the same water. And what she found was that the only way for those to be managed effectively is if there were certain criteria that are met. And some of them are really easy to say, like there's a shared sense of identity and purpose. What that means in practical terms is they're the people who are in line in service to that shared sense of responsibility, and they know who they are. They also know who is not, which means they know who they can collaborate with to achieve their shared goals. Another one is to have fair and inclusive decision-making, which means that people make decisions together. The phrase that makes this distinction is the difference between power over and power with. Power over is when someone dominates, coerces, or controls you, so you feel powerless, oppressed, maybe angry, and that breaks down trust. Whereas to have power with means we make decisions together in ways that we feel are fair and inclusive, and this is a way that helps us to navigate conflicts and to deepen our trust. So these 8 core design principles include things like this, which help us to form effective groups, and then we're able to cooperate together toward our shared goals.
If there's one thing you could tell everyone in Earth at the same time, what would you say?
You are part of the Earth. And I would say this because most of us have forgotten. There's a very strong mythology, especially in the world of Western philosophy and of the modern world, that claims a very illusory and false thing, which is that humans are special and different and therefore not part of the natural world. The truth is, we're special and different because of the way that evolution works in the natural world. And this difference is the difference between having a sense of belonging in a living universe or having a feeling of isolation and separation in a dead universe. And those differences are so huge that I would want to continually remind people, you are part of the Earth.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been an amazing time talking to you.